Macaws are known around the world for their striking colors, huge sizes, and big personalities. Unfortunately, many species are endangered today, and some have already disappeared. In the Caribbean, two species have been confirmed to have gone extinct: the Cuban macaw and the St. Croix macaw. But as many as 13 species of macaw may have once lived across the Caribbean islands. Only the species of South and Central America survive today, and there are 17 extant species found from Mexico to Argentina. Of those 17 species, 7 are listed as least concern, 1 is near threatened, 3 are vulnerable, 1 is endangered, 3 are critically endangered, and 1 is extinct in the wild. That's 16 species. The last species, the Glaucous Macaw, is the rarest of them all. It's listed as critically endangered and possibly extinct. In this video, we're going to hear about this amazing bird. Where did it live? How did it disappear? And what evidence do we have that it may still be out there? Before getting started, I want to thank you all for being here, for watching my videos, and especially to those of you who are subscribed to the channel. I can't believe that we're about to pass 100,000 subscribers, something I never thought would have happened. So thank you all for being here and taking an interest in the obscure topics that I often find myself covering. And if you're not yet subscribed, why not join us? I upload a video every week, mostly on the topics of extinction, discovery, conservation, and rare sightings. Alright, let's take a look at the Glaucous Macaw. In the riparian forests and palm groves of central South America, the Glaucous macaw was once apparently found in large numbers. It ranged from southeastern Brazil, Uruguay, and northeastern Argentina across the subtropical savannas and forests to Paraguay, with some claiming it possibly even ranged as far as Bolivia. The species thrived on the abundant fruits, seeds, and nuts in the forests that they inhabited, especially the fruits of the yatai palm, which was their main food source. Despite having a large range, they were only locally abundant, as they had specific requirements to survive. They needed to live in close proximity to rivers that had large cliffs, as this was where they preferred to nest. And they also needed to be close to areas with high numbers of the yatai palms that they survived on. The birds were hard for people to miss. Rivers were a natural way for people to travel, so they regularly came in contact with the Glaucous macaws as they flew in and out of their nests along the river banks. Glaucous macaws were large as far as parrots go, measuring about 70 centimeters from their heads to the tip of their tails. They were mostly a turquoise blue-green color, with gray feathers on their chest and head. They also had distinctive yellow patches around the eyes and at the base of their bills. Genetically, they're most similar to the hyacinth macaw and Lear's macaw, being placed in the same genus. The hyacinth macaw is significantly larger and has a much brighter blue, but Lear's macaw is very similar, being about the same size but having slightly more blue in the feathers on the head than the Glaucous macaw has. The other primary difference is their ranges. The hyacinth and Lear's macaw are mostly found in tropical forests, much further north. Being large, beautiful, and intelligent birds, easily found in areas that people frequented, and adapted to survive under very specific conditions, the Glaucous macaw stood little chance against the challenges it was about to face. While native peoples of the region interacted with the species for millennia, the first written record of the birds is from 1767. José Sánchez Labrador was a Spanish Jesuit priest, missionary, zoologist, and naturalist. After years of service in South America, particularly Uruguay, Argentina, and Paraguay, all of the Jesuit priests were expelled from Spanish territories. So in 1767, while in exile, Labrador took to writing about his experiences in South America. In his writings, he mentions encounters with a large blue macaw, which he called the Guacamayo Azul. He writes that while he traveled by river through Uruguay, he encountered many of the birds along the Uruguay River. As he traveled further inland to the Paraná River, they became even more abundant. He also mentioned seeing one years later by the Paraguay River. This bird wasn't in the wild, but being kept as someone's pet. Some believe that this blue macaw was a glaucus, while others think that the bird mentioned was more likely a hyacinth macaw that he confused with the blue parrots that he had seen years earlier in Uruguay. It took decades for zoologists to recognize the difference between the blue macaw species. The hyacinth macaw was scientifically described in 1790, but it wasn't until 1816 that the Glaucous macaw was recognized as a distinct species. French naturalist Alcide d'Aubigny recorded collecting a specimen in July 1827 in the Rincón de San Luis on the northern arm of the Patel River. According to him, it was common in the area around what is thought to be the town of Corrientes today. Then in August of 1854, only 30 years later, an American naval officer named Thomas Jefferson Page was in Argentina when he recorded collecting 2 more specimens on the Riachuelo River just south of Corrientes town. By this point, the Glaucous macaw was no longer considered common. In fact, Page described the 2 birds that he collected as being members of a rare species. Of all the surviving museum specimens that we have today, the last one that we know was collected from the wild was taken in 1860. It seems that after this, the Glaucous macaws were so rare that they were hardly ever encountered. So what happened between 1827 and 1860 that made the species go from locally abundant to almost gone? There are several reasons the birds are believed to have declined so quickly. For one, there was a growing demand for parrots, especially macaws, from the Americas. Wealthy people across the world were interested in acquiring the birds as pets. The species that Europeans came in contact with the most were the most vulnerable. This is one of the reasons that the various species of the Caribbean were so quickly eliminated. Because the Glaucous macaws preferred to stick close to rivers, especially rivers that foreign explorers were using to gain access to large parts of South America, they were particularly vulnerable to collection for the pet trade. But they weren't just being collected as pets. Macaws were popularly kept in zoos. Around the time that zoos were gaining popularity, the macaws were already rare. But there are several records of the birds making it into zoos in Europe in the 19th century. The Amsterdam Zoo had 3 from 1862 until 1868. There were several in Hamburg in 1878. In fact, this rare depiction of a Glaucous macaw was made in 1895 at the Hamburg Zoo. Interestingly, in the background is a Spix's macaw, a species which today is the rarest extant macaw and listed as extinct in the wild. There were several Glaucous macaws held at the Antwerp Zoo in 1886. The Berlin Zoo had one in 1892. The Jardin d'Acclimatation in Paris also had one from 1895 until 1905. There was one somewhere in Denmark in 1900, and another somewhere in the Netherlands as late as 1928. And the London Zoo had at least 2 between 1878 and 1912, though they likely had more than were recorded, as at least one source mentions several being held there at one time. The last captive bird was held in Buenos Aires Zoo. This is one of the only pictures of a living Glaucous macaw in the world. It was taken at the Buenos Aires Zoo in 1936. 2 years later, the bird photographed was dead, and at the same time, the species was probably on the verge of going extinct in the wild. Despite the macaws being captured to be kept as pets and for zoos, this was really the least of their worries. In fact, it was far more common to hunt the parrots in order to eat them and to collect their feathers than to keep them alive. Major foreign exploration of the region began in the 1830s, consistent with the timeline of the species apparently moving from being common in the wild to becoming very rare. D'Orbigny recorded that the Glaucous macaws were regularly consumed by people passing through the rivers, in particular because they were so easily encountered there. The birds' nesting habits on cliffs along riverbanks brought them into direct contact with people regularly, making them prime targets. Despite being regularly consumed, their meat was described as not being particularly palatable. But the biggest reason for their disappearance wasn't hunting at all. It was their reliance on the palm fruit that grew along the river's shores. Much of the inland forest habitat that contains the palm fruit the macaws fed on remained intact well into the 20th century, but the forests along the rivers were destroyed with early exploration. It was common for Spanish explorers to establish towns along the rivers as they traveled. This ensured that future travel would be easier, as ships would find plenty of places to stop and gather supplies. D'Orbigny reports several times in his writings that the forests along the rivers were cleared to make way for agriculture in order to support a growing human population. This meant that the yatai palms disappeared from the areas close to the nesting sites of the macaws, and they could no longer find enough food to survive. In the 20th century, there were very few credible sightings. In March of 1951, Uruguayan zoologist Raúl Vaz Ferreira was about 10 kilometers south of Bella Unión in northwest Artigas, right near the spot where Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay meet. He was traveling on the road to Salto when a blue macaw flew up and landed on a fence post next to the road. While the sighting was short and no bird was captured, researchers are confident that this was a Glaucous macaw, as it's the only native species of blue macaw known from the region. Scientists returned to Bella Unión in 1952 to look for the species, planning to focus their efforts in the palm savannas where the bird had been spotted the year prior. Sadly, when they arrived at the spot where the parrot had been sighted, they discovered that the palm savanna along the road had been entirely torn down and turned into a eucalyptus plantation. They performed multiple surveys in the area between 1952 and 1955, and again between 1978 and 1988, but no surviving birds were ever rediscovered. The other accepted sightings of the species are from the early 1960s, between 1961 and 1964. Residents of some of the small towns along the Iguaçu River in southern Brazil, near the town of Mangarinha, reported seeing a species of macaw living on the steep riverbanks nearby, and it wasn't familiar to them. It was reportedly blue-green with yellow at the base of the beak. The only species of blue macaw known from the region is the Glaucous macaw, and the description of the birds seen and their nesting habits are a match. In 1970, a letter surfaced from a local man who also claimed to know that the species persisted in that same region, and that the nesting site was nearby, but he preferred to keep it a secret in order to keep poachers away. While these are the only accepted records of wild Glaucous macaws from the 20th century, some other evidence has been presented. American ornithologist Tony Silva worked with bird trappers in the 1970s and 80s, and he claimed to have personally seen a chick of what he first believed to be an off-color hyacinth macaw, but that he later felt was more likely a baby Glaucous macaw. It had been collected from the border of Bolivia and Brazil, outside of the Glaucous Macaw's known range. Silva also claimed that he had seen several Glaucous macaws make it into California through the pet trade, also sourced from Bolivia. And finally, he claimed that he worked with a trapper who collected Glaucous macaws from eastern Paraguay as late as 1988. All of these reports have been unverified, and until reliable witnesses can come forward to confirm them, they are not considered reliable or authentic. The majority of researchers today believe that the species likely persisted in some small pockets of its range, particularly southernmost Brazil and eastern Paraguay, until as recently as the 1990s, but that today the species is almost certainly gone. If the Glaucous macaw does persist, its numbers would be so low that it would have almost no hope of survival. Yet, some are holding out hope that it may still be out there. It is one of very few species assessed as critically endangered and possibly extinct, and the IUCN has assessed their population as being between 0 and 20 birds. And that's it for today's video. What do you think? Is it possible that the Glaucous macaw is still holding on in South America? Share your thoughts in the comment section below. I need to say a special thanks to my patrons. Without their ongoing support, I wouldn't be able to produce a video like this every week. If you want to support the channel, consider joining us on Patreon. The link is in the video description below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.